So far, what we've done is a lot of the background work that it's going to be necessary in order to be successful this semester in terms of getting started in our assignments. We've also had the good fortune of being introduced the political decision making and our understanding of the political world that we're going to utilize as the semester moves forward. However, I think that this semester we start to get more into the nuts and bolts of what people think we mean when we talk about policy analysis. A lot of what we're going to learn here is how to present our policy analysis in a way that people who study policy analysis, and maybe even more important, the people who use policy analysis, decision makers in a political realm, understand it. And after all, I would think that the main reason why we engage in policy analysis is that we have public policies that we want to evaluate, and we want to pick the best possible method for implementing those policies that we're hoping will solve the problems that we see in the world. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look a little bit at what we mean when we talk about policy analysis. You can see you can see in the voiceover slides that I start by talking about policy making and what policy analysis is. You see that there is a much stronger idea of policy analysis as being a neutral effort to discover the best possible solution to problems from the perspective of Bardock or from the perspective of Munger, who we're going to borrow from an awful lot both this semester and especially in this presentation. I think that one of the most important jumping off points for you is to watch the Munger presentation to the Loyola University Economics Club. It says rent-seeking entrepreneurship and political choice. Now, I wouldn't be awfully concerned about rent-seeking and entrepreneurship and political choice in particular, but I think that gaining an understanding of what Munger views as the role of political decision making, of policy analysis, of the way that he views the world. Munger, much more than Stone, tends to present a view of policy analysis as a particular way of doing things, and an almost apolitical way of doing things. It is in Stone, in challenging the rationality project, is pretty much challenging the approach of Munger. Maybe less so of Bardock. Now, Bardock views this eightfold path that he talks about as a methodology that you can use to help uncover solutions to problems. And we'll talk about this a little more, or if you've already watched the slides, you're going to see that Bardock presents a approach for decision making. Now, we're also going to talk a little bit about the steps in policy analysis. And you should think about Bardock perhaps as being somebody who's going to teach you how you should conduct policy analysis, whereas Munger's going to teach you a little bit more about how to present your policy analysis. Remember, the person who makes the decision on whether to accept your conclusions is probably somebody who has read many of these types of reports, and what they'll do is they'll expect any policy analysis report to have a certain structure, a certain order of considering things. And so where Bardock and Munger disagree, or where they present things in a somewhat different way, you should think of it not so much that they're disagreeing on what policy analysis should be, that instead they're disagreeing maybe on how policy analysis should be presented. Now, either approach is is good. You can view as a safe harbor in this class. But if you finish your policy analysis paper and you haven't addressed the major issues that Bardock and Munger talk about, then you have to question whether you've actually accomplished what you're trying to do. I've said before in this class, and I'm going to mention it many, many times, that you should view any paper that you write in any upper level college course as, in its essence, being a secret essay examination, right? If you take an approach that's entirely different from what you learn here in the class, and you haven't talked to me about why you've done it, my rationale for saying that that's unsatisfactory is that the person who looks at your policy analysis is going to judge it based on other such papers that he has read, whether it's your instructor or whether it's the professional politician or bureaucrat who would look at it. But on another level, it will be something where I'll say, wait a second, what has this person actually learned in class? And this is an opportunity for you to show things that you've learned in class, and, or not. Now, you don't have to utilize every idea. That's not the purpose of what we're doing here. The purpose of what we're doing here is to teach you a new approach, a somewhat different way to look at how political decisions are made. But you do get the chance to show off what you've learned and sort of the responsibility to show off what you've learned. So your reaction paper for this module is going to be your reaction to the Munger presentation. And so you'll want to write a summary, but it's also going to be very important this time that you give an idea of what your interpretation of what Munger has said is. You now have this background of knowing a little bit about what Stone has said. You'll know a little bit of what Bardock has written, and now you'll be able to apply that to Munger's approach, to Munger's presentation. Now, what are some of the other important ideas that we're going to cover? Now, I think maybe one of the first places to start is we look at John Kingdon. John Kingdon wrote this book, Agendas, Alternatives, and Public Policies. This was the edition that I learned from was written in the 1990s. He originally started thinking of these ideas in the 1980s, his so-called three streams approach to policy making. You'll see sometimes that I'll struggle a little bit with the title of a book, and it's because one of the things that shows that you're truly acculturated into political science is that you refer to books not by their titles, but by their author and the year of their publication. So I would be much more likely to say Kingdon, 1995, than I would be to say, Agendas, Alternatives, and Public Policies. Now that should actually be easy because that's what the three streams are. The three streams are this idea of getting your policy onto the public agenda and getting it adopted is closely associated with the idea of problems. Remember, I asked you all to start your policy question by looking not at a solution, but looking at a problem. But really, there's these three streams, right? There's the problem. We have to recognize that there's a problem that needs to be solved by the government. Now, if you see a problem that needs to be solved by somebody other than the government, then you go to them. And then you start to be a little outside the scope of what we're doing. But what do you go to them with, right? You go to them with an alternative, or we might say a public policy that you want to have adopted. We're going to talk in a minute about the garbage can model. Are problems always older than the solution? not always. And then the final leg, the final stream is politics. We can't ignore that there could be a solution out there, but it's just not politically feasible at a given moment. You need this window of opportunity. The main thing that you're probably going to pick up from Kingdon is this need to mix the three different streams, that they need to come together for there to be a window of opportunity to actually get a policy adopted. And I would say that if you can't make an argument, in your paper that those three streams are apt to unite in the near future, then you're probably on the wrong path in your policy, in choosing a policy alternative. And then that becomes a problem that for you writing the paper, is that if you have a proposal that can't possibly be adopted, then you're not going to solve the problem that you see. And I don't know, if I'm nice, you'll still pass the course, right? I'm a nice guy, but you won't really have engaged the goal of the course, which is to learn how to propose policies and to write about policies in such a way as they might be adopted. What we do in policy analysis is sometimes called a rational, comprehensive approach. Stone calls it the rationality project, as she mocks it. But that's kind of attacking a straw man. It's been recognized now for 50 years that real policy making, we don't talk about him here, but Herbert Simon actually won a Nobel Prize in economics in the early 1980s, for recognizing what he called bounded rationality, that you can only go so far in the approach of thinking about every possible solution for the entirety of the problem. Instead, we see Cohen, March, and Olson, who we do talk about, come up with this idea called the garbage can model. And the thing that's really interesting about the garbage can model is that it suggests that there's this pile of potential solutions that are just sitting around waiting, where the alternative comes first, and then the alternative starts to look for a problem. Think about Microsoft Teams. They didn't invent Microsoft Teams after they discovered that there was going to be a global pandemic, but rather there was this global pandemic, and they said, well, then how are we going to keep our schools open? And people said, well, what about Skype? What about that other one that's infiltrated by the Chinese government? I can't remember which one that is. I keep wanting to say Hulu, but no, Hulu's that television streaming service. Microsoft Teams. Microsoft says, hey, we have this application, and all you have to do is send everybody the messages and pay for our Windows 360 and all the rest, and the next thing you know, you can hold classes even though nobody is face to face. So that was an alternative that found a problem and probably made Microsoft a little bit of money. And I'll go you a step farther. We like to think of these business applications as being the only time that occurs, right? But in reality, government does the same thing. Think about tax cuts. Every time a Republican takes office, they find some possible thing, some problem. Year after year after year goes by, and they find a problem that fortunately a tax cut will solve, or not, but that's what they sell. Similarly, right? We have all sorts of we have all sorts of alternatives that people are suggesting all the time. Every semester since, I don't know, 15 years. For 15 years, every semester, somebody wants to do a paper on how if we just legalize marijuana, it will bring in so much money to the Treasury that we'll be living in Shangri-La. And every semester you look at that and you say, well, yeah, maybe that's so. But you really seriously doubt that the person who first decided that legalization would be a great idea, he was doing it simply because he felt that there were too many taxes. If you start by looking at the problem, there might be better ways to bring in tax money than sin taxes. So in any case, the garbage can model says that alternatives and or solutions and problems exist independent of each other, and they tend to come together when somebody recognizes a chance. Somebody has to know about a particular alternative, and people grasp at alternatives when they see a problem. And the person who speaks up is likely to get what he desires. So for all the complaint actually that Stone has about the so-called rationality project, she would agree with this, and it's an idea that's much older than her policy paradox approach. We give you the opportunity to read the Cohen, March, and Olson article if you wish. It's really good. It's pretty simple to understand. It's if you decide not to read it, right? If you're trying to think of great ways to pretend to have learned something in the course, then certainly do something to familiarize yourself with the difference between the rational approach that seems to be pushed by Munger and Bardock and the way things actually seem to work quite often. Now Munger, and we borrow from Munger a 5 steps in policy analysis. And so if we're looking at the steps in policy analysis, what are we pretty much discussing, right? Well, we're problem formulation. Now, when we say problem formulation, it's this understanding that we have to recognize the problem. There's many problems out there that we never notice. How is it that we start to see some problems as being public problems when initially we just saw them as we just saw them as problems that individuals are having, sometimes by their own fault, right? You think of I always ask students, I say, well, what do you think they called homeless people before they called them homeless people? Right? The word we use when we say homeless people, we mean to take away a negative connotation, right? Somebody said hobos, and I said, well, yeah, but they didn't all ride in trains. A lot of times people called homeless people bums. Why? Because they didn't think much of them, right? The word came to mean something negative. And, there's all sorts of terms like that. When we decide to call somebody an undocumented alien instead of an illegal alien, it's because we don't want that loading of illegal onto this person who's come to the country, right? So we make a choice. Sometimes it's the words we select. Sometimes it's the numbers we use. There's many different reasons why all of a sudden a problem becomes something that we should solve as a people, rather than what they should solve as an individual. And different generations, different people have different priorities in what needs to be solved. Next thing is, once you have a problem, then you have to come up with criteria. Munger says criteria come next. Bardock says that alternatives come next. If you're thinking though, I've said to many of you in our meetings that after you have a problem, then you need to imagine what fixed would look like. If you don't know what fixed looks like, right? If you're playing a sport, sometimes that's very obvious, right? You're in the baseball game or the soccer match and it's nearing the end and you need to score. Then you need to come up with a play or a plan that will cause you to score that run to win the game. So it's pretty clear what your plan of action is. What's fixed when you're behind by 2 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning of a baseball game? Well, it's at least that you score 2 runs to tie the game, right? Or maybe it's 3 runs so that you win the game. Nobody says fixed is let's leave the bases loaded. Or if you're not a baseball fan, nobody says fixed is losing the soccer match 4-3. Nobody says fixed is tearing up your front yard and not planting new grass there. So in any case, we're either looking at criteria next or we're looking at alternatives next. Once you have the criteria, a good third step, according to Munger, is to isolate what the alternatives are. You have a set of alternatives. Maybe it's just the status quo versus some other plan. But ideally, it's the status quo versus several other plans. And then you select from amongst your alternatives whatever would do the best job of fulfilling the criteria for fixed. When you have your set of alternatives, you have to look at the political and technical constraints. That's the next step. If your organization just can't carry something out, then you can't do it. It might be that the best thing to do to solve the problem of having everybody be upset with your organization is to call them all on the telephone one by one and say how sorry you are. Think about an organizational constraint of the military, right? And maybe you're trying to contact everybody who has lost a loved one in a battle. Now, if that battle is that 4 people were killed in a rescue operation, well, maybe the president can call. What do you do if it's the Battle of the Somme, right? 100,000 people or more are killed in a couple days. Obviously, well, what they did is they sent form letters back in World War I times. So the form letter was actually invented in World War I because it was too daunting of a task to write individual letters. So many people were being killed. That's not best. That's not the best thing you could do, but there's an organizational constraint. Maybe there's a lesson there, but it is an organizational constraint. The telegram, the new technology you could send telegrams. It's still not as good as. Well, anyway, once you have selected an alternative and you've dealt with the institutional and organizational and political and technological constraints, then you need to implement the policy, which is easier said than done, and then evaluate it. Now, as we're thinking about all of these 5 steps, you should think this would be a really good way to organize my paper. I would write an introduction, and then after the introduction, which, you're not writing a mystery novel, you can tell me what you decide right in the introduction. ostensibly the introduction's not written before you figure it out, before you've done any of the work. It is, after all, a report of a finished project. Your next step, you lay out the problem. Your next step, you lay out the criteria for the solution. Your next step, you list a bunch of alternatives and you explain why you picked the one you did. Your next step, you consider the politics and the technology and the organizational limitations to your alternative. If it's an alternative that doesn't fit, then you probably should go back and take it out of your list of alternatives, and you should pick another alternative that meets those. But the very order in which you're putting this in, right? Bardock would say consider things like that earlier, because he's telling you how to conduct the actual research. Munger's telling you how to write it up. So you don't have to explain how the alternatives you didn't pick are feasible. You just have to tell me how the one you did pick is. And then finally, you have to have some plan for implementation. And then you can go ahead and from there, and you can you can go ahead and close out and write your conclusion. And you've written a great paper, or at least a well-structured paper. Now, Bardock expands on this approach. He has 8 steps. I'm going to encourage you to look at each of those steps. Define the problem, assemble some evidence, construct the alternatives, select the criteria, project the outcomes, consider and confront trade-offs. Then he says, stop, focus, narrow, deepen, decide. Each of those are different concepts in a way, but in essence, once you have the alternative, right, once you've narrowed it down to the alternatives, try to really understand each of the alternatives and their strengths and weaknesses. And then make a decision based on the best of these. And then he says, tell your story. So I guess after you've done all of these other 7 steps, you're going to tell your story using the approach that Munger suggested. Munger is showing you what you should do, not necessarily how you should write it up. So I detail that to some large extent over the next several slides. I strongly encourage you to look at Munger's approach. We're going to be dealing with Munger throughout the remainder of the semester, but also we're going to have several different ideas related to public policy analysis that you should consider. And then we close a little bit by talking about the challenges of policy analysis. And really, I think that the main thing that you need to focus on is that you won't always in your professional career get to just decide what you want. You'll have to find somebody, right? If you're going to be a professional policy analyst, what's the difference between a professional and an amateur, right? A amateur just needs to find somebody who will let them do something. You can be an amateur policy analyst from your mom's basement when you're 45 years old. Send letters to the editor, right? Those are everybody's an amateur policy analyst. If you are a professional, though, you have to get somebody to pay you to do what you do. And sometimes in getting somebody to pay you to do what you do, you don't get to decide exactly what you want. If you decide that you are that your solution to all the world's problems is that you're going to that we're going to use uranium, where we're going to have uranium reactors in every car. Good luck getting the oil industry to pay for that. Good luck getting the Sierra Club to pay for that. Who's going to pay for that? I don't know. I don't even think that people who mine uranium would want that responsibility. So in any case, you should You should pay particular attention to the slides. You have a great video to watch. It's a little long. It's a little long, I'll grant you. You have your only assignment that is due is the reaction paper. You'll have the aftermath of your policy question paper to deal with perhaps, but the only new assignment is the next reaction paper. You have a bunch to read. You should look at the Cohen, March, and Olson garbage can model of organizational choice. 1972, that's a long time ago. It's still probably not much better. And once you're finished with all of that, you'll be able to take some time and further refine your paper. I strongly encourage you, if you've already set out your schedule, set aside a day or two. I think you'll be happy you did. All right, that's what I have for you all. I wish you all well. Good luck, and I'll talk to you again soon.